What if sitting in the wrong seat wasn't a mistake, but a test? When a black woman is asked to leave first class because she doesn't look like the mother, no one expects what comes next. But she doesn't fight back with anger. She answers with truth, dignity, and changes lives. This is not just her story. This is about every person who's ever had to prove they belong. Watch to the end. Excuse me, ma'am, you might be in the wrong seat. That sentence, seemingly polite, cut through the quiet of the first-class cabin like a thin blade. A few passengers looked up from their wine glasses, from their Kindles, or from a drowsy gaze out the Boeing 787's window. All of them were drawn to a single detail. A black woman, dressed in a simple beige suit, was sitting beside a white little girl with golden hair and piercing blue eyes like lake water. That woman's name was Amara Whitman, and the only reason the flight attendant questioned her had nothing to do with the ticket, her behavior, or her demeanor, but her skin color. "Sorry," Amara looked up, her eyes meeting those of the flight attendant, a blonde woman in a pristine uniform. Her makeup so perfect it looked cold. The flight attendant smiled, but the smile never reached her eyes. "This section is for first-class passengers only. We can help you find your seat in economy if needed." Amara didn't get angry. She didn't rush. She calmly pulled a thick paper ticket from her jacket pocket and held it up in front of the attendant. Her voice smooth. "When I confirmed first class, paid in full. Window seat?" The attendant glanced at the ticket, then at the little girl beside her, who was playing with a doll. "Is she with you?" Amara nodded. The attendant paused for a few seconds. "Are you her nanny?" The air in the cabin froze in an instant. An elderly couple behind them leaned in to listen. A young man in a suit at seat 2B narrowed his eyes. And across the aisle, a white woman in a Gucci dress let out a contemptuous laugh. "Oh, come on. We all know that child doesn't belong to her," she said louder than necessary, directing her voice at the child. "Sweetie, are you okay? Is she bothering you?" The girl turned around, a little surprised, then naturally grabbed Amara's hand. "She's my mommy." The whispers grew louder. Some passengers turned to look, a few awkward smiles, a few confused expressions, and some silent, condescending stares. Amara sat upright. She didn't frown, didn't react. She simply looked the attendant straight in the eyes. "Is there a problem, ma'am?" Rewind a few minutes earlier. Flight DL-477 was preparing for departure from JFK Airport to Atlanta, Georgia. Inside the first-class cabin, where each seat cost half a month's salary for a typical office worker, passengers were settling into their plush chairs. The seats were spacious, the carpet soft, and the air faintly smelled of champagne. Amara had entered with her young daughter, Lily. The girl was about 4 years old, with curly blonde hair, blue eyes, and energy like morning sunlight. At that moment, the flight attendant was still smiling. But that smile slowly stiffened as she saw the black passenger hand over a first-class ticket and sit in seat 1A, the premium window seat. Not because the ticket was wrong, not because the behavior was inappropriate, but because it didn't match what they were used to seeing here. "Mommy, look at the clouds." Lily pointed out the window, her eyes sparkling. Amara smiled and gently fastened her daughter's seatbelt. But the adults around them weren't smiling. They were whispering. Back to the present, the second flight attendant had been summoned. A tall, slim young man with a hesitant gaze. "Ma'am," he said, "we just need to verify some details for security reasons. Are you the child's legal guardian?" Amara sighed softly, slowly opened her wallet, and presented 3 items: her passport, health insurance card, and Lily's birth certificate. On the certificate, the line was clearly written, "Lily Grace Whitman, mother." Amara Eloise Whitman. The little girl still clung to her mother's hand, whispering, "Why are they asking you that?" "Mommy." Amara stroked her daughter's hair, her eyes never leaving the cold stares of those standing there, as if interrogating an imposter. She replied gently, "Because sometimes people only see what they expect." At that moment, an elderly woman seated in row 3A spoke up, her voice deep and clear. "She's not just a passenger. That's Dr. Amara Whitman. I read her book on racial identity and motherhood. She's a keynote speaker at Harvard next week." Silence fell, a silent detonation. The attendant hesitated. The male attendant holding the documents blinked. glanced at the name on the paperwork, and looked back at the face in front of him. Dr. Whitman, we apologize if... Amara smiled for the first time. No need. I've learned to expect this. She turned to Lily. How about we enjoy the flight? Sweetie. The girl nodded, resting her head on her mother's shoulder. As for everyone else, the attendants, the passengers, and those who had laughed earlier, they all sat still, forced to face the truth. They were wrong, and they had let prejudice guide their words. That was when another passenger, a young mother, unexpectedly spoke up. Dr. Whitman, thank you for your grace. If that were me, I don't think I'd be this calm. Amara nodded softly. Silence is not always surrender. Sometimes it's strength. The chief flight attendant returned to the first-class cabin a few minutes later with a carefully rehearsed professional expression. She approached Amara's row and spoke in a noticeably softer but not entirely sincere voice. Dr. Whitman, on behalf of the cabin crew, I just want to apologize for the misunderstanding earlier. Amara looked up. She nodded politely. Thank you. May I ask, how often do you mistake white mothers for nannies when they travel with black children? There was no anger in her question, no raised voice, but it was sharp like a blade slicing a cold line through the air. The chief attendant fumbled. A few passengers lowered their heads, pretending to read. The man in seat 2B kept fiddling with his phone, yet typed nothing. Amara didn't need to say more. She had said enough. In the airline's operations center, hundreds of miles away, a phone call had just begun between the customer feedback department and the legal office. A short video clip, barely a minute long, was spreading rapidly on Twitter. It showed a flight attendant asking to verify the legal relationship between a black woman and a white child on flight DL477. The company's internal communications officer sat upright in a leather chair, cold sweat on his brow. Does anyone know who that woman is? He asked. A young employee quickly opened a laptop, typing fast. Amara Whitman, Doctor of Social Psychology, TEDx speaker, one of Time magazine's 20 most influential women of 2024. A deadly silence filled the room. On the plane, Lily had fallen asleep on her mother's shoulder. Amara still hadn't closed her eyes. She sat quietly, as still as a lake, but her eyes were wide open, memorizing every detail, memorizing the suspicious glances, memorizing the condescending tone, memorizing the polite but mistrusting smiles, memorizing the silence of those who knew she was being mistreated but said nothing. Amara didn't need to shout. She just needed to remember. 3 rows back, the woman in the Gucci dress flipped a page in her magazine, but wasn't reading. She was sweating. Every notification beep from her phone made her flinch. She had been the first to scoff, the first to declare, that child doesn't look anything like her. And now she knew she had been wrong, not just about a mother, but about a scholar, a woman with a voice, a woman with a network far beyond those hiding behind their biases. A male flight attendant approached with a glass of champagne. Compliments from the captain. Dr. Whitman. Amara shook her head. I'd prefer water. He nodded and quietly walked away. His hand holding the tray trembled slightly. There was something in her voice that made everything feel heavier than a scream. When the plane landed, all first-class passengers received an announcement. Due to unexpected scheduling adjustments, we ask all first-class passengers to remain seated while ground staff assist with disembarkation. But no one knew why. Except one person, a female ground staff member, stood waiting at the plane's door. Her name badge read Internal Investigations, Corporate Division, not a regular airport employee. She walked straight to Amara. Dr. Whitman, may I have a word? Amara stood up and nodded. I thought you might. A small room had been arranged at Gate A13, a VIP area usually reserved for government officials or international dignitaries. The young woman, her name was Madison Green, introduced herself as a representative directly appointed by the airline's board of directors. First of all, Dr. Whitman, I'd like to apologize. Sincerely. I've reviewed the footage and reports. There's no excuse for how you were treated. Amara looked her in the eye. I don't need another apology. I need an answer. Madison swallowed hard. Amara sat upright. How many other mothers didn't get a platform to speak? How many were made to feel invisible without a camera to catch it? Madison bowed her head. Too many. That very evening, Amara posted a message on her personal page with over 3 million followers. No anger, no provocation, just a brief recounting, factual, truthful, without embellishment. Alongside a photo, she and Lily sleeping on the plane, their heads leaning against each other. Caption: "She called me the nanny. My daughter called me mommy. Only one of them was right. Only one of them mattered." The post reached 2 million shares within 12 hours. An emergency meeting was held the following morning on the 43rd floor of Atlantic Sky's headquarters. In a long conference room with glass walls overlooking the city, 12 men and women in suits sat waiting. On the giant screen was the personal page of Dr. Amara Whitman, where her short post had surpassed 2 million shares overnight. At the head of the table was the airline's CEO, Richard Langston. His face furrowed not from age, but from the crisis surrounding them. The internal communications officer spoke first, his voice tense. "We're under siege. Over 400,000 brand mentions in the past 24 hours. 76% negative. Our stock has already started to dip this morning. But worse than that, we're now associated with an image no one saw coming." Langston interrupted. "Racism?" No one responded. No one objected. The truth was too clear. The deputy head of HR spoke slowly. "We've issued a formal apology. We've reached out to Dr. Whitman by email and phone." Langston looked directly at him, and her response: nothing. The room fell silent. No one was surprised, because people like Amara Whitman don't need to shout. She only needed to sit still and let the world watch the system's reaction. And it was that silence that frightened them more than any accusation. Langston leaned back in his chair. His eyes rested on his assistant. "Arrange a meeting with her. Today, at a quiet space in New York, in a small wooden house north of Riverside Park." Amara was brewing tea when the doorbell rang. A middle-aged man stood on the porch, salt and pepper hair, tall, wearing a light gray coat. Richard Langston, CEO of the third largest airline in America. Amara looked at him for a moment before inviting him in. No handshake, no small talk. Langston sat in a leather chair by the window, sunlight shining directly on his face. He didn't look up. He just said softly, "I came to apologize." Amara poured tea and placed the cup in front of him. "And to protect your company." Langston looked up. She didn't speak accusingly. She spoke like someone who was too familiar with people coming for their own benefit rather than true awakening. He nodded. "I won't deny that. But I also won't deny that what happened was unacceptable." Amara sat across from him, her eyes unwavering. Unacceptable is a phrase we people of color hear often. It's usually said after the damage is done, after we've been humiliated, questioned, treated like strangers, even when we're simply being mothers to our own children. Langston clenched his hands in his lap. He didn't interrupt. He knew this wasn't the time for defense. "I don't need an apology from an individual. I need a commitment to change from an organization. I'm not the first mother to be questioned, and I won't be the last unless you do something." Langston nodded slowly. "I agree. I'd like to invite you to serve as an honorary advisor for our full system retraining program, including the entire flight crew, cabin staff, and airport personnel." Amara looked at him. "I don't need a title. I need action. I need new hiring systems. I need policy changes. I need transparent reporting. And above all, I need you to understand that people like me don't want special treatment. We just want to be seen as human beings." Langston sighed. "I understand, and I accept." That night, on Atlantic Sky's homepage, a statement appeared. Not just another apology, but a public commitment. 1. Mandatory retraining for all flight attendants under a new program called Seeing the Unseen, developed by Dr. Amara Whitman and her team of experts. 2. An anonymous reporting line for passengers who've experienced discriminatory treatment. 3. Quarterly publication of internal metrics on racial discrimination complaints. Thus, establishment of an independent oversight board with representatives from minority communities. Amara didn't post anything on social media that night. She didn't need to. The system's response said it all. The next morning, Lily woke up and had breakfast with her mother. She looked at the morning news on TV and saw her mother's photo alongside the headline. "The woman who made the airline industry look in the mirror." Lily asked, "Mom, What did you do? Amara smiled and gently brushed her daughter's hair. I just sat still. But I didn't let anyone push me into a lesser seat. Lily blinked, then nodded. You're a superhero. No, sweetheart, I'm just your mom. And that was enough to change an entire system. Night fell, and the city folded itself under golden lights. In the small room at the end of Amara's hallway, light spilled from her desk. On the wall, a series of diplomas hung neatly. Columbia University, Stanford, University of Oxford, prestigious degrees that quietly testified to a life risen from the depths. She sat before her laptop, reading through hundreds of emails pouring in after the incident. Words of support. Stories from other mothers who had experienced the same treatment. Black women raising children who didn't share their skin color. A new message appeared. The sender's name was Sophia Johnson. Amara opened it and read each line. I'm the adoptive mother of a boy of African descent. I was stopped at the airport when he cried out for me, calling me mom. They held me for 4 hours. No apology. No explanation. Just because I didn't look like his mother. Thank you for speaking up. Even when you just sat still, you helped me regain hope. Amara leaned back in her chair, her eyes closed. An old memory swept in like a cold wind through a crack in the door. Years ago, she had been a senior at Stanford. One winter night, she was walking back to her dorm after a late class. In her hands were research papers on child psychology, the field she loved. As she passed through the park, 2 white police officers approached her. They said she matched the description of a suspect in the area. Amara showed her student ID, but no one cared. She was handcuffed, pushed into a patrol car, and held for nearly 6 hours at the station. No one was by her side. No one asked if she was okay. When they realized she was the wrong person, one officer muttered, You're lucky all we did was detain you. She was released without an apology. That same night, Amara wrote the first line in her research journal. They don't need a reason to doubt me. Just my skin color. Back in the present, Lily woke up crying from a nightmare. She ran into her mother's room, her eyes brimming with tears. Mommy, I dreamed you disappeared, and I couldn't find you in the crowd. Amara held her close, gently patting her back. I'm right here. I'll always be right here. After a while, Lily asked, Why did people look at you that way on the plane? Amara hesitated. She didn't want her daughter to grow up afraid. But she also didn't want to hide the truth. Some people think someone like me couldn't possibly have a child like you. The little girl looked puzzled. Why? Amara didn't answer right away. She looked into her daughter's clear blue eyes, eyes that hadn't yet learned to view the world with suspicion, because they haven't learned to see with their hearts. My love. The next morning, Amara returned to her office. On her desk was a document she had been working on, a new research proposal titled Trust Denied. The psychological impact of racial bias on black mothers. She stared at the title for a long time, then opened the draft and typed a new section. In a world where black mothers constantly have to prove they are the mothers of their own children, to exist with grace is an act of defiance. But we cannot stay silent forever, because our children deserve to be seen as rightful products of love. She saved the file, sent it, then stood up and put on her coat. Today, she had a meeting with the board of a local school, where she would be speaking on the topic, Seeing the Invisible. Raising children across cultural differences. As she left the house, her phone rang. It was an unknown number. She answered. A man's voice said, Dr. Whitman, this is a representative from the Federal Aviation Council. We're considering including your case in our annual report on customer experiences involving discrimination. Would you be willing to share additional details? Amara replied. I don't share to get someone on a headline. I share so the system doesn't repeat its mistake with the next person. She hung up, took a deep breath, then walked forward, steadily, not because she had never fallen, but because she had learned how to rise through intellect, through dignity, and through the memory of winter nights in handcuffs with no one asking why. 3 days later, Amara sat on the velvet sofa of the popular television program Morning America Today. She had been invited to speak about the story that had gone viral across social media. The host was Fiona Hartley, a sharp white woman known for her charming voice and smooth transitions when conversations reached delicate territory. The studio was silent. Cameras were rolling. Fiona leaned in. Smiling brightly, Dr. Whitman, first of all, allow me to speak on behalf of the national audience. You are an extraordinary mother. Your story has touched millions. Amara smiled faintly. I'm just an ordinary mother, but I had to act in an extraordinary situation. Fiona nodded, shifting to a more solemn tone. So at that moment, when they questioned your relationship with your daughter, what kept you from getting angry, from escalating like many others might have? Amara sat upright. I was angry, but I wouldn't let my anger distort the mirror my daughter was looking into. The audience applauded lightly. Fiona leaned back slightly, eyes narrowing just a bit. Do you think it could have just been a simple misunderstanding, not necessarily discrimination? The air suddenly felt heavy. Amara stopped smiling. When a black woman in a professional suit is asked if she's the nanny of her own child, even after presenting a ticket, a birth certificate, a passport that's not a misunderstanding, that's a recurring pattern. And that pattern has a name. Fiona nodded slowly. She was about to interject, but Amara continued. I've learned to recognize a system that doesn't just discriminate when it hates, but also when it doubts, dismisses, or assumes we couldn't possibly be in the roles we occupy. The applause this time was louder than before. Fiona pressed her lips together and changed her tone again. If today, that airline sent you a large sum of money as compensation, would you accept it? Amara looked straight into the camera. I don't need money. I need my daughter to grow up in a world where, when she calls me mommy, no one questions it. After the taping, Fiona walked into the backstage area where Amara was packing her bag. She approached slowly. Her expression softened. I hope I didn't upset you on air. Amara turned. Gently. I don't expect to be treated differently than others. I only hope not to be treated worse. Fiona nodded, exhaling softly. Television doesn't always allow us to linger on what really matters. Thank you for standing your ground. Amara replied. I once learned to stay silent just to survive. But now I speak so I can live truthfully. That evening, a clip of Amara's interview went viral with the title, The Mother, Mistaken for a Nanny, made the nation reflect. In just 3 minutes, millions of viewers saw the image of a woman sitting upright, not angry, not panicked, not shouting, but every word she spoke struck the deepest corners of the human conscience. The comment section overflowed. I once did what that flight attendant did. I once doubted a black woman in the park. Today, I feel so small. Or, I was raised by a black mother. I know what it feels like to be looked at like a stranger. Thank you, Amara. The next day, Amara received invitations from 3 universities, 2 international organizations, and 1 media company offering to purchase the rights to turn her story into a documentary. She declined all of them. She told her manager, I don't want to turn pain into entertainment, but I want to turn it into education. That afternoon, she picked Lily up from preschool. A teacher came out, looking at Amara with gratitude. Thank you for speaking up. I'm an adoptive mother, and I've been doubted too. Your story helped me feel less alone. Amara hugged her without saying a word. A hug, a shared understanding, a story passed from one heart to another. That evening, Lily asked again, Mommy, did anyone call you a nanny today? Amara held her close and answered softly, No, honey. Today they called me a speaker, a mother, someone who taught them to see with their hearts, Lily whispered. I'll teach my friends to see like that too. Amara smiled and kissed her forehead. Then I've succeeded. 3 weeks after the incident on the plane, Amara was invited to deliver the keynote address at the National Forum on Systemic Bias in Public Services. It was a nationwide conference held in Washington, D.C., attended by senior leaders in education, healthcare, aviation, and media. The main auditorium held over 500 people, most of them influential CEOs, school principals, politicians, journalists. Backstage, Amara stood in front of a large mirror in a charcoal-colored suit. Adjusting her collar, she wasn't nervous, but something unsettled her. The ceremony began. The host introduced each speaker. When it was Amara's turn, the entire hall erupted into applause. Hundreds of eyes turned toward the woman who had made an entire industry confront itself. Amara walked out, the spotlight casting a glow on her calm face. Her eyes steady, she began in a low, measured voice. When a child asks their mother why people don't believe she's their mom, You can't answer with logic alone. You have to answer with history. The hall fell silent. I used to think that if I worked hard enough, studied enough, achieved enough, people would stop doubting me. But what happened on that flight reminded me of something many people of color have long known. Personal effort alone cannot undo a system programmed to question you the moment you enter the room. While the applause still lingered, a man from the back row stood quietly. He wore a white shirt and a dark tie, looked to be in his 40s. Tall and lean, no one noticed him walk up to the stage until he stopped next to Amara and handed her a small envelope. The audience murmured. A security assistant approached, but Amara raised her hand to stop them. She looked at the man. No one knew who he was, but Amara did. She quietly accepted the envelope and opened it. Inside was an old photograph. Herself, at age 23, holding a white newborn baby. On the back, a handwritten note, "Thank you for keeping your promise." Amara held the photo gently. She said nothing for a few seconds. Then she turned to the audience. "I didn't plan to share this today, but maybe the time has come." She raised the photo so everyone could see. 4 years before I adopted Lily, I was the caregiver of another baby girl. Her mother had died from complications after childbirth. The biological family wanted to abandon her. I couldn't let that happen. I held her in my arms for nearly a year before they took custody back. They said I wasn't qualified. Not enough. Blood. She paused. Since then, I've learned that sometimes you can love a child more deeply than the one who gave birth to them. But society won't give you the right to be called mother. The hall was silent. An older woman wiped away tears. A black man placed his hand over his heart. A female senator nodded, her eyes shimmering. Amara took a deep breath and looked straight into the crowd. Lily is my daughter, not because she shares my DNA, but because I stayed by her bedside when she had fevers, because I read to her every night, because I'm the only person she's ever called mommy. And that is the only truth that should matter. As the speech ended, Amara walked off the stage in profound silence, not because the audience didn't want to clap, but because they were still sinking into the shame of biases they'd never spoken aloud. When applause finally came, it wasn't loud. It was reverent, grateful, awakened. That evening, the man who had brought the envelope came to see Amara. They sat together in the hotel courtyard, under warm lights. "I'm the uncle of the baby girl in the photo," he said. "My brother, the child's father, died in a car accident last year. Before he passed, he told me the only person who was ever truly that girl's mother was you." Amara said nothing. "I didn't come today for attention. I came to say thank you for loving her more than those who were supposed to." He pulled out a letter. "This is a signed family declaration. We want Lily and the child from back then to be recognized as your legal daughters, not just emotionally. Legally, too." Amara accepted the letter. Her hands trembled for the first time in weeks, not from anger, but because finally justice had arrived, not in a courtroom, but in the hearts of those who once denied her. 3 months after Amara stood on the national stage, the training program, Seeing with the Heart, developed by her and her team of experts, was officially launched, not just in a few airlines, but across the entire Civil Services Federation, including aviation, healthcare, early childhood education, and public administration. A 6-minute introductory video was shown in thousands of offices and meeting rooms across America. In it, Amara appeared in a simple white room, with no elaborate backdrop, no stage lighting, just her and a chair. "I'm not here to teach you morality. I'm here to remind you that sometimes a single suspicious glance can cut as deep as a wound, and sometimes a question that seems harmless can make a child believe their mother doesn't belong to them." That video was screened for hundreds of thousands of customer-facing employees across the country. People began calling it the lesson from Seat 1A. A kindergarten teacher in New Mexico sent an email to Amara. "Today, I didn't ask an Asian mother if she was the nanny anymore. I remembered you, and I remembered the pain in your eyes." A nurse in Chicago shared, "For the first time, I understood why Black patients don't trust the system. I've been part of that fear, even if unintentionally. Now I know how to start again." But not everything was smooth. Some people pushed back. Certain conservative media outlets called the program overly sensitive. A state senator declared, "We shouldn't turn a one-time incident into a nationwide education movement." Amara didn't respond. She simply published a short article in Psychology Today. Prejudice doesn't have to be loud to exist. It just needs to be tolerated. And the best education system isn't one that teaches people what to say, but one that helps them know what must remain silent and what must never be silenced. During an internal press briefing at Atlantic Sky Airlines, a senior flight attendant named Marcus, who had worked in the industry for over 22 years, stood up to speak after completing the training. I used to think I was fair. I never refused service based on race. But I once asked a mother if she knew how to use a child's safety seat just because she was brown. I've never asked that of a white customer. He paused. His voice deepened. I'm sorry, and I know what I have to do now, so I never have to say that again. Amara was invited to serve as an advisor for a new national education program titled Awareness Anchored in the Power to Serve. Her name appeared on the cover of new curriculum textbooks, but she declined authorship credit. I don't want students to remember my name. I want them to remember the feeling when a black mother was called a nanny and know they can be the ones to change that. One Saturday, Amara took Lily to the park. Lily, now 5 years old, ran and played with her friends among the fallen yellow leaves. A middle-aged woman in a flight attendant uniform approached.
Hello.
I used to be one of the people who thought you were the nanny. Amara didn't respond. The woman continued. I wasn't on that flight. But I've thought that way about others. And I hurt them by thinking it. Amara nodded gently. Thank you for saying that. The woman bowed her head. I changed after your lecture. Thank you for not turning your anger into revenge. Amara smiled. Anger is not the enemy. Anger is just the warning light. What matters is how we steer after it turns on. That evening, as Lily slept, Amara sat on the balcony, watching the city lights come on. She thought about the journey she had traveled, from the girl handcuffed in the middle of the night because she matched a suspect description, from the mother asked, Are you sure you're this child's mom? From the passenger invited to return to your proper seat, to the person now asked to help an entire system reflect on itself. No one is born to change the world, but sometimes the world is forced to change because someone refused to stay silent when their most sacred role was doubted. 10 years later, James Baldwin High School held a ceremony honoring students who had made outstanding contributions to social advocacy. In the center of the auditorium stood a white girl with blonde hair and blue eyes. Her name was Lily Whitman. She stepped onto the stage to receive a medal for founding the See with the Heart program at her school, where hundreds of students each year learned about cultural diversity in families, invisible biases, and active empathy. The audience clapped nonstop. In the second row, Amara sat quietly, tears rolling down her cheeks. No one clapped louder than she did, but no one felt prouder either. That evening, mother and daughter sat on the porch. In the quiet of their garden, Lily, now 15, rested her head on her mother's shoulder. Mom, I remember your old video, the one where you talked about that suspicious glance. Amara smiled and nodded. What do you think of it? Lily thought for a moment. What hurt me the most wasn't that they doubted you. It was that I didn't understand at the time why you stayed silent. I was too young. Amara squeezed her daughter's shoulder. And now I understand that you weren't silent because you were weak. You were silent because you knew that the right voice, spoken at the right time, echoes louder than any scream. Amara looked at her daughter, eyes glistening. I was afraid that if I got angry that day, they would only remember an angry black woman. But if I stayed calm, they would remember a mother who was hurt, but still chose to lead with dignity. Lily nodded, softly said. They remembered, and they changed. Amara looked out into the far horizon. Not all of them, but enough to make this world safer for mothers like me. And for children like you? The next morning, Amara received a package. Inside was a small book titled Transracial Families, a practical guide for elementary school teachers. On the cover was a handwritten note. We no longer teach from theory. We teach from experience and from the lessons you gave us. A teacher in Minnesota. She placed the book down and smiled. Small steps were becoming a powerful current, and it all began from seat 1A on what seemed like an ordinary flight. That evening, Lily sat beside her mother, flipping through old photographs. One particular picture made her pause. It was the photo from years ago, Amara and Lily on the airplane, the little girl fast asleep, her head resting on her mother's chest. Sunlight from the window cast a soft halo over Amara's hair. On the table lay a boarding pass, a birth certificate, and an unfinished book Amara had been reading. Belonging, Lily asked. Was it worth it? All the storms, the stares, the questions, the sleepless nights? Amara placed her hand over her daughter's. If I had to do it again, I would still sit in that seat. And I wouldn't move, because I belonged there. And I want you to know, you belong anywhere you come with love, with values, and with truth. Lily smiled. I'll always sit where I belong, and I'll save the seat next to me for someone who hasn't been seen yet. The narrator's voice rose, gentle as breath, but deep as roots. This story isn't just about a mother who was mistaken. It's about everyone who has ever stepped into a space where they had to prove they had the right to be there. It's about those misjudged by skin color, by attire, or simply for not fitting someone's familiar mold. You might be that person, or you might have stayed silent when you saw someone like that. But today, you can choose differently. Look closer, listen deeper, and remember sometimes the simplest act, like not moving from your seat, can start a revolution. And if someone ever doubts that you belong where you're sitting, don't move. Let the truth hold your place. Share this story if it reminds you of someone who once had to prove their worth. And if you believe empathy deserves to be seen more widely, help keep this conversation going. Because justice doesn't arrive by magic. It comes when ordinary people choose not to stay silent.